Have you ever had to make a decision that came at a personal cost? Like everyone. Came at a personal cost. Maybe something that required you to sacrifice time, comfort, or even a relationship or relationships. It's kind of like what it means when you get married. But that's not what I'm referring to. I remember a time when I had to choose between staying in my comfort zone and stepping into something new, something I knew God was calling me to, at least indirectly, through the voice of the bishop, but it felt risky. Probably if I had known everything that was involved in this, I would have turned around and walked away, or I would have said, rain check. The example is that when I was asked many years ago, to make a long story short, to start this process, at that time it was really about creating more meeting room space. That's what I really wanted to do when I came here, because I recognized there was already a lot going on in the parish, and meeting room space was very limited, so I did needs assessment studies for assessing whether or not we really needed the extra meeting room space. That was it. And then this whole seismic thing came out, and thought it would be the church first, and then it wound up being the schools. So I was asked to do this, upgrading the school. Well, it quickly progressed, because it started out as a single stream school, and then I realized, no, this has got to be a dual stream, and so on, into what we now have. So I knew I was getting an awareness, or developing an awareness, that this was a mountain of work, and it was totally out of my league. I mean, what priest is prepared for this unless I had been a contractor before, or maybe a contractor / architect / project manager But of course, I was able to get people around me. But I really wasn't sure, even with what I knew, if I really wanted to do all this work. But I did because the bishop asked me. So it wasn't easy, but the reward, as I went along, and certainly now looking back, the reward far outweighed the cost. That experience made me realize how following Jesus Christ often involves a deep personal cost, but also incredible rewards, ultimately in the next life, but there's even rewards now if we're paying attention to them. It's just we shouldn't fixate on the temporal rewards because they come and go, but ultimately it's the reward that awaits us in the next life. Because hopefully all anyone wants to hear is good and faithful servant. Because if we hear anything else, it's not going to be pleasant. I never knew you. That's the flip side of it. But good and faithful servant, welcome into the joy of your master. I think we all have moments when we face a decision that following Jesus, about following Jesus, and it's not always the easy choice. We want to follow him, but sometimes the cost just seems too high. It did for the apostles. Peter said, Lord, this must not happen to you. But Peter was put in his place. And to make a point, Jesus did this. Peter seemingly took him aside. Jesus said, no, 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 no. Everybody's going to hear my response. So he looks at them and he says, this is for you too. Hear what I'm going to say to this man, my chosen one. He's got it wrong, and you probably are thinking the same thing. It's just he opened his mouth first. So maybe it's standing up for, in our context or situation, maybe it's standing up for our faith at work, in school, or even among family members. That's probably the most trickiest one, where it could lead to awkwardness or tension. Or maybe it's choosing to forgive someone who has hurt us deeply, even when we feel justified in holding on to resentment. Or one last, possible gazillion examples, an addiction to pornography that we feel we just can't break away from. We've tried things and they just don't seem to work. We know discipleship is worth it, but the cost can feel overwhelming. We wrestle with whether or not we are really willing to give up our comfort, our control, or even our reputation for the sake of following Christ. And there's always that question, I think, at least it's been in my mind at different times. It's like if I give Christ control of this area of my life, which really should be the entire area of my life, but let's say it's just this one area, what's on the other side of it? It's kind of like God is going to take us out of Egypt, but what's on the other side of the Red Sea? I don't know that anybody really thought about it, but they sure did when they were on the other side. And it's like God started to test them and purify them, and they wanted to go back to slavery. They actually wanted to go back to slavery. Think about that. Let's go back to Egypt, where at least we had onions and leeks. Oh, gag me green. But they wanted to go back to slavery. Think about that. They had prayed 400 years to get out of it. God gets them out of it. And because he tests them, they want to go back to slavery. That's a powerful lesson for us. We should read it over. What's the lesson for me? We're tempted at times to want to go back to slavery. Why? We will settle for comfort in anything that we're used to, even if it depresses us. But at least we're used to it. We somehow settle in. We know it's not what's going to make us happy, but that's what happens to us because we're fallen creatures. In the gospel of the day, Jesus has a conversation with his disciples that makes the cost of following him abundantly clear. He says, of course, he starts the conversation by saying, "Who do you say that I am?" Because you need to answer, every one of us needs to answer this question. And it's not just knowing the right answer, because I know the right answer, you know the right answer, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's not enough to get us into heaven. That's not enough to keep us following Jesus before, God willing, we get into heaven. Because the devils know the right answer, and they're in hell. So there's obviously more that comes from just knowing the right answer. When Jesus begins to explain that the Messiah, being the Messiah means, that he will suffer, be rejected, and eventually put to death. Of course, we know what happens. I already alluded to that. Peter rebukes him because Peter did not factor in his understanding how the Messiah, the one they had been waiting for, could suffer and die. Jesus responds by reteaching his followers in no uncertain terms that following him involves sacrifice and surrender, and it will involve suffering. I wish I could say it another way, but there is no other way. There is no other way. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross. I'll put it into modern language because the cross for us, we understand it means denying ourselves, but these people didn't understand it that way. They saw the road sometimes lined with men crucified naked. That's what the Romans did to make a point. Don't mess with the empire. All right, so they were horrified. They were beside themselves with disgust at what the Romans did. So if Jesus says, take up your cross, it would be like me saying, get into the electric chair and follow me. But even that doesn't deliver the punch because there's no capital punishment in this country. But just imagine if there was. So this had to shock them. It's like, what are you talking about? But he says, take up your cross. And Matthew says daily, or Luke says daily, and follow me. Jesus makes it clear that discipleship isn't about achieving success or avoiding pain. It's about giving up our lives for something greater, for his mission, his kingdom. He says that whoever wants to save their life will lose it. This is completely counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. But you see, it's not really counterintuitive, it's a paradox. And we need to dive into the paradox and ask ourselves, what does that mean for me? But whoever loses their life for me, Jesus says, and for the gospel will save it. And Jesus invites us into a way of living that will cost us. But in the end, it's the only way we will find life. And I would submit that even if we're paying attention, even along the way as we, with the help of Jesus Christ, learn to deny ourselves, we will begin to detect things like a deep joy that nothing else in this world can give us, because Jesus Christ is the source of all joy. And once we start on the way and we persevere, even if we fall and fail at times, but we persevere, we will experience things, indications that this is worth it. So what does this mean for you and me? What are the areas of your life, our life, where Jesus is asking you to take up your cross and follow him? Everyone has these, at least one, probably a number of them. Maybe it's letting go of your need for control because we are control freaks. Think about the original sin. It's pride, but it's basically Adam saying, I need to control the circumstance. I need to be the one who determines right and wrong. So I need to be in control, rather than submission, loving submission to the Father. So maybe it is giving up some control in a particular situation in my life. And then, what's on the other side if I give up this control? Like, what's waiting for me? Maybe it's sacrificing comfort to serve others. Or perhaps it's choosing to live differently in a way that reflects your faith, even if it costs you in terms of relationships or reputation. Jesus is calling each and every one of us to something deeper, something greater, but it will come at a cost. And there will at times be suffering. It costs us to strive to be chaste, to be clean-hearted. There's a real battle involved in that. Or to be honest in our business dealings, passing up opportunities, saying no to things, and so on. As a community, what would it look like if we were all committed as individuals, but sort of from a spiritual point of view, even corporately, committed to embracing the cause of discipleship? Imagine the impact we could have on our homes. That's where it really starts, in the home. Workplaces and neighborhoods. If we lived with the kind of bold faith that's willing to lay down our own preferences, comforts, and agendas for the sake of following Jesus Christ. Together, we could show the world, starting right where we are. So I don't have grandiose ideas, but I do have I try to have supernatural outlook. So yes, we could show the world, but it starts really in our home, where we live, at our work, and where we play, our social, our recreational situations. That true life is found not in self-preservation. It's not in holding on to my life like a swamp, where I don't let the waters flow. And in a swamp, everything just stagnates and stinks after a while. But a stream, rather, that receives, enjoys, but also allows to be given away. That's just, a general sort of view of life. So we could show the world that true life is found not in self-preservation, but in giving ourselves fully to Christ and his mission. Practical takeaway, this week, take a moment. This will be a valuable exercise. Take a moment to ask yourself, there could be 3 or 4, but what's the dominant area in my life where I need to deny myself? I need to say in this area, it could be, yes, I need to do that. So a denial is not always a no. A denial is many times a yes. I need to do that. Or it could be, I need to stop doing that. All right, so identify one area. Probably most of us, we have it already in our head. It's right there because it's bothering us. It's like an albatross around our neck. So identify it, name it. It helps to actually name it, and then actually write it down. And then 3, ask Jesus to help you hand it over to him until it's really his. Until it's really his. And then pay attention to how you are, quote unquote, feeling. You may not feel wonderful, but look beyond wonderful, or this really sucks. Look beyond or deeper than that. Look to, am I obtaining a greater sense of freedom? Is this giving me a deeper sense of joy? Is this giving me a true control over my life rather than being controlled by something else? That's what we have to look for. Pray for the courage to embrace the cost, trusting in losing your life. For his sake, you will find the life he promises. Jesus promises us this, one that is abundant, full of purpose, and even now reveals a kind of spark within us of what it is like to inherit eternal life.